Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Sheila Casey, Chair of Blue Star Families Board of Directors and the Chief Operating Officer of The Hill. As a military spouse, I know military families are extremely proud to serve our country, and they work hard to stay strong while facing the added burdens of military life. I also know that what keeps military families strong is support from us, their community neighbors, and organizations like Blue Star Families. To bridge the gap between military families and civilian communities, our heroes and their families turn to Blue Star Families to be the liaison, advocate, and catalyst. Blue Star Families does this by partnering with civilian neighbors, both individuals and organizations, to create stronger communities of support for military families. As we enter these final days of March, it is hard to believe that our entire way of life has been upended over the past year. We are starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but we are only beginning to understand the effects of COVID-19 pandemic on our country and our military families. Because of Blue Star Families' annual military family lifestyle survey, we not only have great insight on the issues facing our military families, we also have a unique view on just how difficult COVID-19 has been for them. This year, we will focus on 4 important topics. 1, the impossible choice, housing, schools, and financial stability. 2, impact on women, female service members, and military spouses. 3, the lived experience of diverse families and implications for command. And 4, military children's mental health. And of course, how the pandemic exacerbated these already tenuous situations. Mindful of Zoom fatigue, we've engineered this year's release into a series of smaller virtual events focused on different topic areas. During today's event, you will hear personal stories directly from military families and engage in a dynamic discussion focused on a topic that directly impacts our military-connected families. Following the main panel, we will share additional data and insight and engage in more discussion during a data breakout session, which all are welcome to join. Again, thank you for joining us today and investing your time in the well-being of our nation's military families. Our nation is strongest when our service members and their families are thriving. Our military's readiness depends on strong military families, and they're counting on Blue Star Families and so many of the partners attending today to be the liaison that bridges the gap and keeps the mission ready.
I don't come from a military family, but I did fall in love with a member of the military and married him. Shortly after I was married, within a year, I found myself pregnant and then giving birth to a child who had a life-threatening hole in her heart. As I was looking for doctors and arranging her imminent surgery, my husband was coordinating our move to Okinawa. When she was 2 months, she had open heart surgery in Boston. By the time she was 3 months, my husband had already moved to Japan. So there I was, a new mother with a sick infant in a new country, leaving behind family and friends. I lost my job, my career. It was a lot. To civilians, this story may sound shocking, but to military folks, it's familiar. The fact is, all military families have stories to tell. Our stories make us stronger, resilient, but truthfully, many military spouses suffer in silence. 2020, in particular, was a challenging year. We pivoted our programming almost immediately to ensure military families had access to resources, virtual activities for their families, access to timely, useful information about COVID-19, and more.
The Military Family Lifestyle Survey has been tracking issues that military families experience for over a decade now. Some of those issues come up every year. They're persistent: spouse employment, children's education, time away from family. All of those things have been intensified by COVID-19 and this global pandemic that we're in. So Blue Star Families takes those impacts that military families are experiencing and shares them with decision makers so that they can continue to best support their military families.
This year has been difficult for everyone, but military families have been particularly hard hit, which is going to be demonstrated in the findings you're about to see. The pandemic has hit military families' ability to access resources, their ability to achieve financial stability, and it's caused families to make difficult choices about life-changing issues, such as whether they should live apart or how they can protect their family and educate their children in this new environment.
2020 was a very challenging year for everyone, but in particular for military families. Well, some of the things that we saw from the survey this year are service members' experiences of racial and gender discrimination during their military service. We saw spouse employment concerns intensify for families who are trying to virtual school or homeschool their children because of the shifts in children's education. And we saw tremendous shifts for military children's mental health and the impacts of COVID-19 and school closures on military children.
I like to call our survey the People Survey, and this year for the first time, the people get to be part of the release of it, because due to COVID, we have this virtual event. And that means our members across the country are able to tune in, hear the results, and participate in the discussions afterwards. I think that's really exciting.
Military family resilience is absolutely tied to how well military families feel connected to the communities in which they live. Our hope is that, working together, we can better design and implement effective programs, solve problems, and minimize gaps when it comes to serving the unique needs of our military families.
I am grateful for each military and veteran family member who takes the survey. None of this work is possible without their voices. Their voices are what drives this change.
Our families are resilient, and they're the heroes in this story. Blue Star Families is here to help, to provide solutions, support, and to welcome them through our programming. Welcome to the second day of our Military Family Lifestyle Survey results release event. Blue Star Families has long believed that military families deserve to feel welcomed in their communities, to feel appreciated and feel a sense of belonging. We know that when service members and their families feel this way, it makes our families stronger and it strengthens military readiness. This is also fair and what veteran families deserve. Blue Star Families joined with the rest of the nation on a renewed focus on racial equity this past year. And as part of that response and renewed and amplified interest, Blue Star Families has been working on taking steps to demonstrate the commitment and the vision that everyone in this country, inclusive of all races and ethnicities, should have the opportunity to lead a fulfilling life, to thrive, and to belong. Blue Star Families participated in this national call to action starting this past summer. We're in the early stages of doing a lot of work in this area, and we have some preliminary findings that we can share with you soon today. We've been sharpening our focus on other kinds of diverse families as well as we look into our survey results. I myself know what it's like to be one of these things that's not like the others in a military community. Often the shared bonds of service that we all share give us an important bond and transcend those differences. But for many of our families, the differences that they experience, particularly in some communities and sometimes within their units and commands themselves, has an effect on them. And we haven't studied this before. We're excited that we have the opportunity to study it now and to share with our panel members their opinions and their insights. Not only about military family members and service members of color, but also service members who are parts of other minority communities. Before we dive in, let me say we couldn't do this important work without our partners and our survey colleagues at the Institute for Veterans and Military Families at Syracuse University. They've been with us for years and they make our work better. We also have to shout out the great team at USAA who have been supporting our survey significantly for close to a decade. Thank you all for your support. For you, our audience, we encourage you to engage with us. Use the chat to the right of your screen ask questions, share your insights, dig into the survey results with us. Please remember to join us after the panel discussion for a deep dive. You can speak directly with members of our applied research team so that you can go deeper into this year's data and discuss with your peers how to combat these issues facing service members' families and our veteran families throughout the military-connected community. Now, I'm very excited to welcome our co-host for today's session, my dear friend and partner in this release event, Mike O'Hanlon. Hi, Mike. I just want to do a little introduction before I let you speak. Mike is an expert in foreign policy. He's been at the Brookings Institute for decades. He leads their Center for Security, Strategy, and Technology. And Mike has been an early adopter of the idea that military families are part of national security. It really means a lot to me, Mike, that you have been with us on this journey and that you've taken our issues seriously, not as a side issue, but as part of the main course. So thank you for being willing to take part in this discussion today.
Kathy, it's a real pleasure. I hope my audio is coming through okay. Just want to
Excellent.
do a double check on that. Okay, first of all, I'm not going to take much time, but a big shout out to the men and women of our military, not only in uniform, but especially families as well, and veterans and civilians, the entire military family. And those of us who study or otherwise engage with that military family, but are not directly of it, continue to be awestruck at what you do for our nation and at your persistence, your perseverance, your dedication. And again, getting through COVID is only the latest of your many achievements. And of course, it's been superimposed on top of all the other obligations that you've continued to uphold for the country. So thank you. That's the first thing I wanted to say. Second, as we look at the survey, I would just want to tee up one quick thought. And I know we're going to have discussion on this with the panel, Kathy, in a few minutes. But of course, we have seen in recent times in the United States that the military institution in our country, which for so long has been at the cutting edge and the leading edge of social change and of diversity and of acceptance and of ensuring equality of opportunity for all, has had some setbacks on that mission, which is very relevant to national security because we're only going to be as well protected as our all-volunteer force is strong and is cohesive. And we've seen issues with military veterans being involved in violence in this country, for example, on January 6th. There's no reason to think that when you go into the military, you become a perfect person. So we wouldn't expect military families and current active duty or reservist and retiree and other veterans to be angels. But when we see some of our most disturbing episodes in the country involve military veterans, we are troubled. And when we see survey results that tell us that members of minority groups of various types are not always feeling as welcome and as appreciated as they should be, and sometimes even get out of the military for that reason, we have to take that to heart because building the best all-volunteer force we can have is an ongoing mission. And the minute you stop thinking of it as a work in progress is when you can fall backward. So, Kathy, without further ado, I think my next task, and it's a real privilege, is to give a brief introduction for Sergeant Major of the Army, Michael Grinston, who will, I think through video, give us a speech that helps motivate and discuss some of these same issues. He's a native of the great state of Alabama. He has served in the U.S. Army since 1987. He has deployed to the Balkans and to several places in the broader Middle East region, as you would expect for someone of his abilities and endurance in the American Armed Forces and the Army in particular over that period of time. And I just can't say how much I'm looking forward to hearing his remarks. So let me get out of the way and without further ado, welcome the remarks of Sergeant Major of the Army, Michael Grinston.
Hello, I'm Sergeant Major of the Army, Michael Grinston. I'm proud to serve as the 16th Sergeant Major of the Army, and I'm honored to be invited to speak with you today. 18 months ago, after I was sworn in, I started talking about what it means to be in a squad. Many people think I'm just talking about an infantry squad, but really, It's about the people that are closest to you. I tell our soldiers to define their squad and know what your role is in that squad. Are you a leader or a member? I always say I have 3 squads: the Army senior leaders, the secretary, the chief, the undersecretary, the vice, and Chief Dixon Carter, the Army senior warrant officer. And I say I'm proud to be a member of that squad. My team in my office, my XO, my admin team, the travel NCOs, they're also in my squad, and I'm a leader in that squad. And my personal favorite is my family, and some days I think I'm the leader, and on most days I think it's my wife is the leader of that squad. In fact, when people ask, what do we call you? I always tell them, you can call me anything, at least as long as you don't mess up my 2 favorite titles, which is Alexandra's husband and Sophia and Isabella's dad. That family squad is what I want to talk about today. Last October, the Chief of Staff and the Secretary adjusted our priorities and said, people first is our #1 priority. Before, it had been readiness, modernization, and reform. Now, a lot of people ask me, does this mean readiness isn't important? Of course not. But I ask, how can you be ready as a soldier if your family doesn't have a good, safe home to live in? How can you be ready to do your job when you don't have child care? If your wife can't find a job, so you go home every night, and then there's tension in the house, how does that help you focus on the things at work that have to get done? So really, when we say people first, it isn't people or readiness. People first is readiness. One of the findings of the Military Family Lifestyle Survey showed that less than half of the respondents felt a sense of belonging to their unit. But those who did feel a sense of belonging reported significantly less stress than their peers. I spoke with a soldier earlier this year, and he asked how I personally dealt with some of the civil unrest and social issues over the past year. And what he said was that he was really stressed out because he didn't feel like he could have a conversation about some of the things going on in our country at work. So I told him how my office handled it. We closed the door. We literally shut the office of the Sergeant Major of the Army, and we call it family time, and we had a conversation about the things going on in the country. We did it back in the summer, and we did it a few weeks ago. And it was just an open, candid conversation about some of those cultural issues and how we feel about them. And these are uncomfortable conversations about race and extremism and gender issues. But I'd rather we have those uncomfortable conversations behind closed doors than bottle that up like that soldier felt he had to do. I think you should have those uncomfortable conversations with your family as well. My challenge to every leader in the Army is to get to know their soldiers and their soldiers' family. How are we doing that? One small way is to change the promotion boards. When enlisted soldiers get promoted from specialist to sergeant or sergeant to staff sergeant, they have to sit in front of a board of first sergeants and a sergeant major. Usually they have to answer a bunch of questions about regulations and policies and field manuals. I said, I would rather ask that person how much they know about their soldiers. What's the spouse's name? How old are their kids? What Army programs would they call if their soldiers' kids needed off-post child care and they couldn't afford it? The answer to that one, to either the Army Emergency Relief or Child Care Aware. But those are the questions I want our leaders to know the answers to. Sure, knowing the manual for physical fitness is good, but connecting the leader to the soldiers and the family creates trust and cohesion. Then, when something is going wrong, when there's uncomfortable conversation you need to have, you've built a relationship where you can do that. And some of you know it makes a huge difference when a soldier is part of a cohesive team and trusts the other members of their squad and trusts their leaders. So that's one way we're working to improve that statistic of only 46% feeling a sense of belonging. I know there are a lot of military families watching this. We are building a culture of belonging, trust, and inclusion. I know a lot of that starts with our leaders, but I also challenge you to take a role in it. Ask your soldier about the people in his squad at work. Consider hosting some of them, especially if they don't have families of their own locally. Talk with the other families around you. Have open, candid conversations about some of their challenges and learn how to support each other. I think if we do these small things, just look out for those right there around us, we're going to see an increase in that sense of belonging, and we'll show what it means to put people first, which is going to make us a more ready Army. Thank you for having me. People first, winning matters, and we remain Army strong.
Thank you, Sergeant Major Grinston, for those really brave remarks. And I think we'll try to raise up to that ourselves. One thing that really struck me about these findings is that commands that communicate well with their men and women do foster a sense of belonging. And Sergeant Major Grinston, I think your communication is helping many military families and service members feel that sense and allowing them to better thrive, just as you say. This most recent military family lifestyle survey revealed to us that many military families of color, particularly African American military families, are underrepresented, not only in as they move up the ranks, but often in our military and veteran support organizations, both in who is reached by support organizations and who's in the staff and leadership. I'd like to welcome one of our members, Jamila, a Navy spouse, who had that challenge with connection and who decided to do something about it. I'd like to welcome Jamila now to tell you about her story.
My name is Jamila Stanfield. I'm a Navy wife, mother of 3 daughters, and the creator of BlackMilitaryWives.com. Black Military Wives is more than a Facebook group. We're a part of the general military community, but we also recognize that there is a need specifically for Black military families. It was important for us to say to each other, you're not invisible. We see you, we hear you, we want to help you. With 26% of service members of color reporting that they've experienced some form of prejudice or racism, it doesn't surprise me at all. Racism, it happens, and it happens in ways that a lot of times we don't necessarily talk about. My husband is a higher ranking naval officer. He has personally experienced, was being approached because he parked in 06 and above parking. They see his skin first and they see the uniform second. We really shouldn't assume that based on your gender, based on your color, that you only serve particular roles in the military. All of them are vital and everyone is capable of serving in those roles. I feel so much gratitude that Blue Star Families conducted a survey and reported the discrimination that a lot of military families of color experience. It shows people that even if they are not aware, it needs to be addressed. You can't address what you don't know. And that's what these surveys do. They bring awareness.
Thanks, Jamila. And now I'm really excited to welcome my friend and true thought partner with Blue Star Families, not only for the Military Family Lifestyle Survey, but in so much of the work we do, including the work on racial equity. Harriet Dominique, Senior Vice President and Director of Diversity, Inclusion, and Corporate Responsibility Officer at USAA. Harriet's a leader and a mentor to so many of us in the military-connected community. She's informed our work. Most recently, she's been a key player in the conversation that we've been having around race and diversity. Her as an individual, and also USAA is taking some critically important steps to ensure that we are accurately supporting and engaging military families of color. Harriet, thanks so much for being with us today.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you so much, Kathy. We really do appreciate and are honored to be here as part of this very important discussion today. As you mentioned, USAA has been a supporter and continues to be a champion for your efforts and the work that you do. Today, I'm representing our USAA CEO, Wayne Peacock, and our 36,000 plus USAA employees. Our sole mission and purpose is to serve military families. And we thank and are so grateful for the military service members and their families. Thank you for all that you do in service to our nation. Additionally, Kathy, I want to thank you and the Blue Star Families team again for all you've done and continue to do to empower and enable military families to thrive. USAA has supported your work and this survey for a decade, and we do so because your research, your guidance, your leadership, and the example you provide helps us to better serve military families. And again, USA's sole mission. And we're especially grateful, as the other speakers have talked about this new component of your survey that is so timely and necessary and addresses the racial inequities and the demographic inequities that we face as a nation and also faced by military families and currently serving. So this panel, and I'm excited to introduce the panel, is deemed the lived experiences of diverse families and implications for command. And Sergeant Major Grinston encouraged us that our SBAR, our accountability, is to create this sense of inclusion and belonging and acceptance. And we truly can only do that if we have courageous conversations that are difficult and at times makes us uncomfortable, but truly serve to illuminate, and give us an understanding of the challenges and most importantly, the steps we can take to overcome those challenges. So get ready. The panel might make you a little uncomfortable, but we will keep it real today. And let me introduce them. First, we have retired U.S. Army Command Sergeant Major James Sims. We also have Jennifer Dane, Executive Director at the Modern Military Association of America and an Air Force veteran. And lastly, we have Khalid Wright, CEO at the Air Force Aid Society, and he also served, I don't need to tell anybody here, but he served as the 18th Chief Master Sergeant Major of the Air Force. And so we're going to go on and get started with the panel. We'll be here for about 30 minutes, and I will start with the first question to James. James, give us a bit of information about what can be done to help lessen the perception gap between service members of color and their white counterparts as it relates to discrimination in the ranks.
Thanks a lot, there, Harriet, for allowing me to be a part of this wonderful panel with the great professionals that has the same level of passion to get at this matter. And also, Kathy, thank you for allowing us to be a part of this charter that you lead every day. So let me just start by just saying to Sergeant Major Army Grissom, he has some wonderful points in this talk. His talking points was truly spot on. You know, when I think about it from my perspective, I'm thinking about my time in the Army as a sergeant, a platoon sergeant, first sergeant and the command sergeant major, at every echelon from the lowest rank of the command sergeant major to the four-star general when I ended up retiring. So I think about those comments, and I think about my experience, and I just want to talk about a few things that I think is very important. So it's all about continuing to have the enduring listening sessions and the hard conversations that's greater than just knowing the individual service member body nameplate, right? I think it's about truly learning every intimate things about his or her family, along with that individual. That's truly what it's going to get required to get down to what the Sergeant Major Army was talking about when the readiness perspective. I think about me, had to walk around every week, every Friday, had to sit down and spend time at our soldiers' families' homes, home base, off base, in the barracks. I think it ran a greater responsibility and it built the foundation of trust. I think that's important. But let me start by saying that, if you haven't experienced racism, you may not truly understand the impact of those that have. I think I got to start there because it's going to set the condition for a few of the things I want to talk about here. So with that statement, I think it's very, very important that we always understand the plight of someone of color and the things that they are experiencing every day when we're thinking about that percentage gap and that perception out there in the survey. So with that, I think when you're having these enduring conversations, these tough talks amongst each other, I think what you'll find out, one, that you'll learn about yourself and understand your own unconscious biases. I think that's hugely important. I also think it's very important too that you challenge some of our own stereotypes. I think that's really important as we continue to move forward through this process and we embrace this mission. But you got to be open-minded when you are listening and having those conversations, and you got to be willing to learn from each other. I think it's a learning session when you're having those deep conversations from the leader to the subordinates to the leader. So that's getting down to that establishing a work frame or a picture frame or trust that's equally important, in some cases, mostly important. So when I think about some of the composition of the different units across the military and the Army and the different services, I think about it just not active duty services. I think about those organizations that have civilians, those organizations that has contractors. I think those conversations are equally important when you think about building the individual teams and cohesive organization to move forward, right? So that sense of belonging is encompassing to all military, civilian, active duty, and contractors. But when you see something that's inappropriate or discriminatory action, I think it's very, very important that we do something, say something, which means that's how we got to start. But I think before you say something, I think we got to be very mindful of understanding the definition and the process of a defined process in the system that can allow us to get at how do we report that from the lowest junior soldier up to the highest level in the military from a leadership perspective. At the end of the day, Harriet, I think this is every person that served in uniform and family members is about our solution. Each person plays a humongous role in solving this problem as we move forward. And the last couple of things I really want to talk about before I yield to other panelists is the importance of having cultural awareness, right? And the knowledge and the understanding to get at a few things, to get at educating and continue the education process. I think it get at building individual teams and collective teams, getting at promoting and selecting the right folks for assignments and promotion, and really recruiting the folks that are gonna make this a inclusive, diversified military. And then the last thing I really want to talk about here before I yield is, really from me, I think having a diverse mentorship portfolio, having folks within your mentee or mentors that doesn't necessarily look like you, is a start as we move forward. So I yield there, Harriet, and yield for the rest of the panel members.
James, thank you for that. The hardest part about moderating these panels is that there's so many golden nuggets. I had to take my pen and write notes, and I know I'm supposed to be moderating. So thank you for those golden nuggets. I got 4 wonderful points. And before we go to the next question, Jen or Kay Wright, any other perspectives on this perception gap and things that we can do?
No, I agree with James. Obviously a lot of great points. But I think one of the first points that he made is that if it's never happened to you, you don't understand it, and that might be really the basis of some of the gap that exists between white service members and service members of color. Is that if it's never happened, you don't understand it, and you may or may not take the time, effort, or energy to try to understand it. And so I think all the things that he mentioned in terms of making sure that you understand the cultural differences between different races and religions. You understand the things that are important to someone of a different sexual orientation than you are really important, I think, to help close that gap. But until we begin to educate ourselves and educate each other, and the last thing I'll say is, oftentimes the responsibility is on the person who is being discriminated against to educate people about it, which you could argue whether it's fair or not. But many times, I think whether it's people of color, whether it's women, or the LGBTQ community, oftentimes we suffer in silence because we don't want to be that person that ruffles feathers or is playing the race card or what have you. But the reality is, I think all leaders and all of us as members of the United States military departments need to be more culturally aware of the people that we live and work with on a regular basis.
Absolutely. All of those points are so powerful. The two are a couple that I heard is that it truly is everyone's accountability, and it requires everyone to actually drive change. And we'll talk a little bit more about everyone. The other thing that I heard you both talk about is the criticality and power of education and how we learn more and move from cultural awareness to cultural competency, that deeper level of understanding that drives change. And then the last thing that I heard you both say is about unconscious bias. And the reality is that every single one of us, regardless of demographic, has unconscious bias. And I'll share a tip for you. It's a free test that you can take from Harvard. It's the Harvard Implicit Association Test, IAT, and it gives you the opportunity to be aware of your unconscious bias. I recommend that everybody take the time to take that test, just maybe to learn a bit more about yourself. And now we'll move to the next question. And I'd like Jen to please talk with us a bit about the importance of statutorily codifying protections against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. For example, the Equality Act. So Jen, talk to us a bit about that. Educate us, please.
Absolutely. This is a really great conversation. And thank you so much for moderating this, Harriet and Kathy at Blue Star Families, and just for providing a seat at the table. Because sometimes it's just as important to be represented and have a seat and sharing our experiences. So currently in 29 states, we know that 29 states have no protection against LGBTQ folks. So that means at any day, I currently live in Arizona, I could be fired from my job. I can be turned away for housing protections. I can be denied a loan just for being myself. And so it's really important that we go into legislation and make sure we have these protections against discrimination, because also we've seen that 80 bills have been introduced or more than 80 bills have been introduced in Congress that affect our military families, that especially those that are either transgender or have kids that are transgender. And so we know that there's a huge proportion of harms that we are seeing currently. We know that there are 250,000 active duty LGBTQ service members. And so just having a space is really important for us. We're only 10 years out from the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which provided protections for LGB service members. And we're only just beginning to see the protections for trans service members currently. And I have to say this, today is Transgender Day of Visibility, and it's a really important time that we do celebrate those brave heroes that served for the LGBTQ community, especially the trans community, because they are serving and they've had to serve either in silence or behind some really terrible policies that were implemented. But one thing is why we need to make this, like the Equality Act, happen, is because policies can be created out of tweets, and they impact lives. They impact everyone's lives. I was in the military during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and I personally was investigated for simply just being myself. I was very a stellar performer, but the impact of just being me caused an investigation, and we should not have that. And we know that, when we look at military families and when we're looking at the pipeline for service members of our future, we know that 1 in 6 Generation Z youth or coming into the force, they identify as LGBTQ and they want to be in organizations and places where they are accepted. And when we don't have these protections, they don't want to come in. And if you want to serve your country and you have such a drive for service, we should have these protections for LGBTQ service members, because discrimination does happen. It happens to all those communities. And like James said, we need to, unless it happened to you, unless you know the experiences, you need to ask those questions. You need to go, you need to learn the history that we've always had LGBTQ military service. They've always existed, maybe in the shadows, but they always have. And so when we make these protections, we become a lot stronger. There was a time in my service where I couldn't even bring my partner to my promotion ceremony because I was so afraid. I couldn't introduce, people to my partner's daughter and I had to call her my roommate. And that should not be a thing that happens in today's society. So when we look at the codification of laws, we need to make sure that not only are they protecting, they protect everyone, not just the LGBTQ community, but everyone when we look at discrimination. Because until we're all at a place where we all have equal rights and equity and access, then there's no justice for anyone.
Jen, wow, that's powerful, and I know that I'll open it up to Kay Wright and James before I give a perspective. But thank you for sharing that. And James, Kay Wright, any perspective on this topic?
Yeah, I start there, Eric. I think about the comments that Jen made was so spot on. What comes to my mind is really truly removing categories and start thinking about their merit. Think about the individual and what they bring to the team and what they contribute every single day. So I thought about that, and Jen, I think you spot on. But the thing I'm thinking about is let's talk about the merit of the individual, more so the classification or what they identify themselves with or not. I think it's what they do as a person and how they contribute to the overall team. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll just add, to Jen's point, these laws and policies are extremely important. And I think the one thing that's probably even more important is that they be clear and concise and make sure that commanders and leaders at all levels understand exactly, what rights and benefits they afford, all service members, but specifically our LGBTQ plus service members. And so that commanders and leaders and at all levels don't begin to create loopholes. Now, things that they might do, just like, when we were fighting for equality for people of color in the military and for women and for, as we got through Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The reality is not all leaders in the military are going to buy into this. And we as a department need to be willing to say, hey, either you get on board with this or you got to find something else to do with your life and career. And we may lose some good leaders. But I think in order to progress and to make these laws as effective as possible, sometimes you do have to say, and if this is not something that you can be comfortable with, having people openly serve in the military in your organizations, then we have to find something else for you to do.
Yeah, thank you to all three of you. And, Jen, as I was absorbing and internalizing your perspective, yes, the laws are so crucial and critical. And just as important as we're going to continue to talk about is everyone playing a role and making sure that those around us are embraced, accepted, and have a sense of belonging and a feeling of love. If I'm allowed to say the L word during this moderated discussion, because that's what we all want. And I know that these conversations are courageous. I was looking for this wonderful article by Catalyst that can help with the conversation, I believe, in any sector. And it's an article that is easily digested and actually easy to use. It's called Engaging in Conversations About Race, Orientation, Gender, and how these conversation starters help you go there if you just don't know how to start the conversation. So I'm going to continue to give little tips that have been helpful for me. And with that, we're going to move to this conversation about what commands and military leaders can do. And Kay Wright, with this discussion across all underrepresented demographics, what can military leaders do to combat this issue?
Yeah, so Harriet, I think there are really three, there are lots of things that can be done, but the three things that immediately come to mind for me is one, I think commanders and leaders at all levels need to look at discrimination in all forms as a readiness issue. Most commanders in every service are graded on the readiness of their unit, and that's typically linked to resources and whatever the mission is. And most of the people stuff, and I was so glad to hear Sergeant Major of the Army Grinston, a former colleague of mine, talk about how the Army put people first. But in so many cases, this is always a debate in the military. What comes first, the mission or the people, the whole chicken and egg thing. And I think, commanders have to see this as a true readiness issue, that if people are being discriminated against, or if people don't feel like they can speak up or come to work as their full authentic selves because of, the discrimination, then that's a problem. And they have to figure out, just like command teams at all levels are responsible for the culture and the climate in their organization, this needs to be a primary part of that discussion, not just when someone files an equal opportunity complaint or discrimination complaint. Is something that commanders need to look out for, all the time as part of their annual strategy sessions. And so I think the first thing is, command teams need to see this as a leadership issue. The second thing, and I think James hit on this during his discussion as well, is, you have to learn to see every single person in your organization as an individual. And the first thing that, whenever I talk about this, command teams, commanders, leaders at all levels say, oh my God, I got 500 people. How can I possibly? And I don't mean that you have to personally, depending on the size of your unit, that you have to get to know everybody to the extent that James talked about a little bit earlier. But in general, you have to see people for who they are as individuals, primarily because even though we talk about discrimination and gender and sexual orientation inequality, in broad terms, sometimes none of those groups, believe it or not, are a monolith, right? Not all Black people, not all women, not all, LGBTQ plus individuals are exactly the same and see the world the same. And so I think it's important for, command teams to see each person as the individual that they are. And I couldn't agree more with James about educating yourself and understand the history and the culture of the people that serve in your unit. And then the third thing is, Harriet, something you touched on, this whole unconscious bias. And I know in the last couple of years, this has become more of a training issue in the military, making sure commanders understand unconscious bias. But there's something to this, and primarily, this is the old adage: if you don't know you have a problem, you can't fix it. And so I think it's really important to make sure you not only understand what unconscious and implicit bias is and what it means, how it impacts you, but being able to spot it and talk to the people on your team about when it might be showing up in hiring practices, when it might be showing up in promotions, when it might be showing up in opportunities that create greater opportunities. I think most military members know and understand that some of the key positions, for example, to be an aide de camp or an executive officer to a general, right? That's something that typically leads to command and to promotion. And oftentimes you don't see, I don't necessarily know that it would be discrimination. We don't see a lot of minority officers in those positions, but sometimes it is just due to that unconscious or implicit bias. And funny enough, Sergeant Major Grinston brought that up. Sergeant Major of the Army Grinston brought that up last year after the George Floyd incident, and when we all convened with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and his senior staff to have this discussion. He brought up the idea that he doesn't typically see a lot of minority officers in those positions. So lots of things that can be done. Those are the three that quickly come to mind. And I think commanders and command teams all across each of the services really have to own this issue as a part of the climate and culture in their organizations.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I hear so much of this is just truly going back to realizing that every single individual, regardless of demographic, matters and is crucial to success of the mission. So that's what I hear you say for the readiness issue. And I can't believe how much time, how quickly time goes by. So we have about 8 minutes left. I have 2 more questions. So let's talk about when we say everyone has to be a part of this to actually drive change. So often, and I'm interested if this is the same experience for the military currently serving. I know for corporate America it is. So many times when we have these discussions, the underrepresented demographic is the one at the table, the one on the panel, the one having the conversations, and the one leading the efforts to drive change. But we all know that the only way change is really going to happen is that allies have to be at the table, driving the change, having the discussions, and the role allyship plays in driving equity is critical. Now, when I say ally, I think most of us understand what we're addressing, but ally is an active role, and allies are people who actively choose to align themselves with those who are marginalized or disadvantaged with the aim of improving their circumstances in the workplace, military community, or the world at large. So if each one of you could talk a bit about allyship, maybe how it helped you when you didn't play the role of ally yourself, allyship. And I'll turn it over maybe to Jen first, or whoever wants to go first.
Absolutely. Well, allyship to me is one of the most important things. I mean, obviously, during my service, I did serve under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And even looking back at that, we know since World War II, there's been 114,000 service members that still have been denied access to benefits because of that harmful policy. So being an ally for them too. But for Don't Ask, Don't Tell specifically, we had really great allies come to the forefront and advocate for us. Especially, I can point out Honorable Patrick Murphy. I mean, basically, he took his political career and stood up for the LGBTQ community at a time where it wasn't always it, and sometimes now it still isn't always the thing that people want to do. So having those allies in your court, or even just having we always talk about this proverbial table and having a seat. Sometimes I just want to get rid of that table and just all be there, because it's so important just to have us all come to the table and just discuss this. But for allyship, for me, it's I look at myself and know, how can I be an ally for other communities, and how can they be an ally for me? And it's inviting people to the table. It's supporting businesses too, that don't advocate for anti-LGBTQ laws. I mean, there's very tangible ways that we can be allies that don't always have to be like protesting in the streets, but actually just tangible things that we can do. Voting with our money is like the number one way to be an advocate and ally for at least for the LGBTQ community, and inviting us to conversations like this. And then if whenever we have a voice, then step aside and let others have a voice too, because that's probably the biggest thing is I want to talk all about the LGBTQ community because it's such a passion, but there are times, especially like what we saw happen against the Asian community, where we just need to step aside and say their voices matter a lot more than we need right now, and we need to lift them up. And it's about lifting up others, inviting them to the table, and just having a place that allies and advocates can come and support us, because we can't do this fight and this for equality and equity and access without everyone supporting and humanizing the experience, listening to our stories, and putting us in places that we couldn't get on our own.
So, Harry, I would like to make a comment here. So really, when I think about it, I think about how do we continue to strengthen the fiber of our military, the fiber of our country, right? So I think when I think about this, I think about when the head table or the round table should be inclusive to all. And when you got it set that way, you strengthen the fiber, you interlock and you interweaving as you move forward, right? I think about how, every different opinion is a good conversation to have as you move forward. So I just want to leave on that note there. So I think about it really truly about having the table be inclusive to all as we strengthen the fiber of our military and our community.
Yeah, I'll just close with, I think in the context of the conversation that we're having about discrimination, the ally that we really need is the straight white male. And, it's no secret that in the military, the majority of leadership across all of the services are, straight white males, and many of them who are very, very interested and proactive in helping this cause and fighting for the rights of people of color, of various sexual orientations, for women, you name it. And so I think it's really important that whenever we have these discussions, we have them as allies and them as a part of the conversation, primarily because they're in positions to control the resources. They're in positions that can help facilitate a lot of the necessary change. And I spent my time in the Air Force with my boss, General David Goldfein, and he was a huge advocate and ally for people of color, for women. This is something that we talked about on a regular basis. He was really not just because he had a daughter serving in the Air Force, but he was really adamant about the rights of women, as well as for LGBTQ and for people of color. And so, having allies of all sorts, I think is really important. But in the context of the conversation that we're having, I think it's important to mention that the majority, just like in this country, in the military, are straight white males, and we need to have them as part of this conversation. We need to think about, I grew up in the Air Force, attending and leading Black History Month celebrations and African American cultural committee meetings and whatnot. And typically, when I go to those meetings, and I imagine it's the same at the Asian Pacific Islander or at the Asian American Heritage meetings, you don't see people of any other race. Those celebrations and important meetings and discussions sometimes are just limited to the people in that category. And in order to expose all of us to, like we talked about earlier, different cultures and learn and grow, we have to be able to open those meetings up and invite our allies so that they can learn as well.
Well, this time went by so quickly. I think that's the perfect way to end and turn it back over to Kathy. Jen, James, K. Wright, thank you so much. Military families, thank you very much for your service. And Kathy, thank you for your leadership. Allies, it takes all of us to make change and drive equity. And thank you again.
Harriet, thank you for this amazing panel and for your fantastic moderating and what really stimulating issues. I'd love to bring Mike O'Hanlon back for a minute to comment. Mike, I'd like to talk to you as a scholar of national security. And, we've heard strength in diversity, but the military also often thinks about strength in uniformity. There's a lot that's uniform in the military. So what would you say to people who say this focus on the diversity of our people can be a distraction? And is it in fact center mass to national security? What's your take on that?
A couple of things, Kath. First of all, as we both know, the all-volunteer force is a cherished treasure of our society right now. You wrote a great book 20 years ago about how a lot of people in our country, however, don't really want to serve or don't really want their own children to serve. It's not in their outlook, their perspective on what's most important to them, which is not great. More people need to think about service of some kind. But given that many don't or won't, all the more important is it that we make full use of those who do want to serve. And if somebody has talents and passion and the courage and the commitment to want to put the uniform on for their country, we need that person. And our nation's security depends on it. Recruiting and retention numbers are always sort of on the threshold of being good or strong or excellent. They're usually not way over what we need in the modern era. And even if COVID, changed the job market temporarily, it's at times been difficult for the services to find the people they need. So we need to be able to recruit those who want to serve and have the ability. That would be one point I would make. And a second point, a little bit more tangent to your immediate question, but I still think it's quite important and relevant to the discussion today. As you and I know, when issues of gays in the military were being debated so much back in the 1990s, for example, there was a concern that with the military operating together in the field so closely, that this presence of folks of different sexual persuasion could somehow be more difficult in that kind of an environment than it would be in regular civilian life. And therefore, the military, some people argued, deserved special protection from, if you will, from the requirement to diversify and integrate. Well, I think we've seen that argument was not right, because we've now seen a military that's been integrated with gays go to war in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere for 20 years, where people have been in close proximity, where they have depended on each other to keep each other alive. And this has not been some, sanitized modern battlefield where everybody's in their office and their own, home or apartment at night. This is out in the field, hundreds of thousands of US troops now having had the experience, and they've shown they can do it. And they've shown that unit cohesion, as best I can tell, admittedly from a civilian perspective, I don't want to claim more than I can document, but as best I can tell, cohesion has not suffered because we now have gays in the military. So if we can do it with the LGB part of the LGBTQ population, I think we've already proven that we can do it more sweepingly, and that attitudes should adjust accordingly. And we should, further this impressive achievement. Earlier today, I was a little bit critical of some of the trends in the military having plateaued and some of the ideas that we've been discussing today being causes for concern. But I also want to tip my cap to how the modern American military has performed in the field. And even though the wars have been difficult and long and the outcomes haven't been great, nonetheless, the nation's been protected from another big terrorist attack. And the military's done a pretty good job at the missions that it was given. And I think that's a testament to the integrated quality of this force that now includes many different races, men and women, different sexual persuasions. They've done it out in the field. They've operated together in the field, protected each other, protected the nation. They've shown they can do it. Now it's time to take it to the next level.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you so much for helping host this really important conversation today. It's great to have you with us, and it was great to have our panelists. Thanks again. For our participants today, I want to make a commitment on behalf of Blue Star families from 2021 and beyond. We're going to seek to address the inequities in the service experience of military families of color and diverse military families. We're committed to making sure military families have a sense of belonging in the communities in which they live nationwide. So we, as an organization, will be harnessing new resources, building new programs, and bringing new collaborators to a sustained effort to change the reality that too many families face. We invite you to learn more about what Blue Star Families Racial Equity and Inclusion Initiative is up to. It's multidimensional, cross-sector, collaborative, and aimed at improving the service experiences of military families of color. You can find it on our website, bluestarfam.org. We hope you'll continue the conversation with us online. Please use the hashtag BSF survey. And now, please join us for the breakout session immediately following this panel discussion. Before I turn things over to our board member and CNN anchor and military spouse Brianna Keeler, I'd like to take a moment to recognize our survey sponsor. Without their support of this important work, none of what we do would be possible. The demand for our work has never been greater, so thank you for supporting military families and the military-connected community, including our veteran families. Finally, for those of you who are watching, please take a few moments to fill out the post-event survey. And now, Brianna, over to you. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, I'm Brianna Keeler, CNN anchor and author of the column Homefront, and I'm also honored to be a Blue Star Families board member. As a military spouse and journalist, I understand that there is still so much work to be done when it comes to discrimination in our military. Blue Star Families is putting in the work to better understand our military families' top concerns, like understanding the lived experience of diverse families and their implications for commands through the annual Military Family Lifestyle Survey. This is important work, and it is affecting policy and influencing decisions made at the top levels of the military. After looking at this issue over the past hour, I invite you to join Ingrid Herrera-Yee, Senior Program Officer at the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, and speak with our research team directly in a data deep dive breakout session. We are also fortunate to be joined by Mr. Ron Bass, who will share a bit about his personal experience as a veteran and military spouse to begin the discussion. During this next hour, the Blue Star Families Applied Research Team will be at your fingertips like never before. So dig into this data with the people who know it best, where you will be able to ask your questions. To join our breakout session, just click on the link in the chat to the right or at the bottom of this page. Thank you so much for joining us today. Your participation is helping Blue Star Families move the needle and generate progress within the military community.